For the first time in modern history, the United States stands at the top of the global oil empire, pumping more crude than any nation has ever produced. From the sprawling fields of Texas to the frozen shale basins of North Dakota, thousands of steel giants move in perfect rhythm, drilling, fracturing, extracting. Hydraulic fracturing unlocked oceans of oil trapped beneath rock once thought useless. Tank farms stretch across the horizon. Pipelines run like arteries across an entire continent. On paper, the West has won the energy war, energy independence, energy dominance, a future where no foreign power can threaten the fuel that powers modern civilization. But this victory comes with a terrifying flaw, because oil is worthless if it cannot move. And tonight, thousands of miles away from those quiet American oil fields, the world's energy lifeline is under attack. In the dark waters of the Middle East, oil tankers burn, missiles streak across the sky, drones slam into steel hulls carrying millions of barrels of crude. Warships escort convoys through hostile waters while insurance costs skyrocket and shipping companies reroute entire fleets. The global energy system is not protected by oil wells. It is protected by shipping lanes. Because the ultimate weapon in modern warfare isn't a nuclear missile, it's geography. Modern civilization depends on a handful of narrow maritime corridors, places so small you could cross them in under an hour. Yet through them flows the energy that powers the global economy. Block one of these choke points, and the entire system begins to suffocate. Oil prices spike, supply chains collapse, entire economies grind to a halt. And nowhere is this vulnerability more terrifying than a single stretch of water in the Middle East, barely 21 miles wide. This is the hidden pressure point of the global economy, a place where geography has the power to shake markets, trigger wars, and decide the fate of entire nations. And right now, it is becoming the most dangerous place on Earth. We live in an age of staggering technological sophistication. Artificial intelligence manages global supply chains. Financial markets move trillions of dollars in milliseconds. Cloud servers process unimaginable volumes of data every second. From autonomous vehicles to quantum computing, the modern world appears almost weightless, digital, decentralized, untouchable. But beneath this illusion of complexity lies an almost primitive reality. Every data center, every factory, every airport runway ultimately depends on energy. And much of that energy still travels across the planet in the most analog way imaginable. Inside colossal steel tubes filled with crude oil, floating slowly across the ocean. And nearly all of those floating pipelines must pass through one place: the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow maritime corridor that connects the Persian Gulf, home to some of the largest oil reserves on Earth, to the open waters of the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. At its narrowest point, the entire strait is just 21 miles wide. But the true choke point is even smaller. Because the actual shipping lanes are only 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a narrow buffer zone. Two thin corridors where the majority of the world's energy supply must pass. And the scale of what flows through this corridor is almost impossible to comprehend. Every single day, roughly 1/5 of the world's entire oil consumption passes through this tiny strip of water. Millions of barrels of crude, condensate, liquefied natural gas, tanker after tanker, moving in slow procession through a maritime bottleneck smaller than most metropolitan areas. If the global economy were a human body, this passage would be its jugular vein. Block it, and the entire system begins to bleed. And the geography makes the situation even more dangerous, because this choke point sits in one of the most volatile regions on Earth. To the south lies Oman, a relatively stable Gulf state. But to the north sits Iran, a regional power under heavy sanctions, locked in decades of political and military tension with the United States and its allies. which means the world's most important energy corridor runs directly along the coastline of a nation that has repeatedly threatened to close it. For most of modern history, controlling the oceans required enormous power: aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, multi-billion-dollar fleets capable of projecting force across entire continents. Naval dominance belonged to the richest nations on Earth. But the rules of maritime warfare have changed. Today, you don't need a navy to threaten global trade. You don't even need a fleet. All it takes is a handful of launch sites along the coastline and a steady supply of cheap, disposable weapons. In the narrow waterways of the Middle East, small militant groups and regional powers have discovered something terrifying. They can hold the arteries of global commerce hostage without ever leaving shore. This is the brutal mathematics of asymmetric warfare. Groups like the Houthis in Yemen and the regional networks backed by Iran are deploying weapons that cost a fraction of what they are targeting. A suicide drone can cost as little as $20,000. Anti-ship missiles are relatively cheap by military standards, but the targets they threaten are enormous. $100 million supertankers carrying another $100 million worth of oil. One small drone, one lucky strike, and a single explosion can disrupt global energy markets. In this kind of war, the attacker doesn't need to win. They just need to create fear. Now look at the other side of the equation. To protect these shipping lanes, the United States and its allies deploy advanced naval destroyers equipped with sophisticated missile defense systems. So when a hostile drone appears on radar, these ships respond instantly, launching interceptor missiles designed to destroy the threat in midair. There's just one problem. Each interceptor missile can cost around $2 million, which means Western navies are firing weapons worth millions of dollars to destroy drones that cost tens of thousands. It is a mathematically unsustainable war, and the consequences are already reshaping global trade. Insurance companies have responded by dramatically raising war risk premiums for ships traveling through the Red Sea and nearby choke points, sometimes by more than 1,000%. For many shipping companies, the risk is simply too high. So the world's largest container carriers are making a decision that would have sounded absurd just a few years ago. They're abandoning the Red Sea and the Suez Canal entirely and rerouting their ships 4,000 miles around the entire continent of Africa, past the Cape of Good Hope. Longer routes, higher costs, slower trade, all because of a few cheap weapons fired from the shore. A 4,000-mile detour doesn't just mean a longer trip on a map. It means money. Enormous amounts of money. When a container ship or oil tanker is forced to sail around the Cape of Good Hope, the journey can add 10 to 14 extra days to the voyage. That means millions of dollars in additional fuel burned by engines the size of apartment buildings. Crews must be paid longer. Ports must be rescheduled. Entire supply chains fall out of sync. Then there's insurance. War risk premiums have exploded as ships move through dangerous waters. In some cases, the cost of insuring a single voyage has multiplied tenfold. And those costs don't disappear. They get passed on to everyone. Because oil is not just another commodity. It is the bloodstream of the global economy. Every truck delivering food, every airplane crossing the Atlantic, every factory producing electronics, every cargo ship carrying consumer goods. They all run on energy. And when the cost of transporting that energy rises, the effect spreads everywhere. Fuel prices rise, shipping prices rise, manufacturing prices rise. Suddenly, the cost of groceries climbs. Gas stations update their numbers overnight. Electronics, clothing, appliances, everything becomes more expensive. It's a stealth inflation bomb hidden inside global logistics. And yet, what's happening in the Red Sea is only a preview. Because the real nightmare lies further east, in the Strait of Hormuz. Remember, this narrow corridor carries roughly 20% of the world's daily oil supply. If Iran were to heavily mine the strait, or block it entirely, even for a short period, the shock would ripple across the entire planet. Energy analysts warn that such a disruption could send oil prices skyrocketing to $150, even $200 per barrel almost overnight. And the global economy is simply not built to survive that kind of shock. Because at that point, the damage spreads far beyond energy markets. Central banks, already struggling to contain inflation, would lose control almost instantly. The delicate balance of interest rates, debt, and consumer spending would shatter. Businesses would cut investment. And financial markets would react the only way they know how: violently. A sudden energy shock of that magnitude would almost certainly trigger a severe global recession and potentially one of the most brutal market corrections in modern history. All from a narrow strip of water, barely 20 miles wide. For decades, the modern world operated under a powerful assumption: that globalization was permanent. We built a $100 trillion global economy on the belief that trade routes would remain open, that energy would always flow freely, and that the oceans connecting continents would stay safe. Oil tankers would move without interruption. Container ships would glide through chokepoints without fear. Digital finance, advanced technology, and domestic energy production gave the illusion that we had finally outgrown the vulnerabilities of geography. But the system only works if the oceans remain open. And that assumption is now being tested. Because beneath the complexity of the modern economy lies a much simpler truth: the physical world still makes the rules. You can print unlimited money. You can write infinite lines of code. You can build artificial intelligence powerful enough to simulate entire economies. But you cannot print a new ocean. You cannot widen a strait carved by geology millions of years ago. And you cannot eliminate the reality that the energy powering modern civilization must physically move across the planet. Which means a 21-mile strip of water and a $20,000 drone can threaten the stability of the most technologically advanced civilization in history. In the end, geography is the ultimate weapon. This is the fragile paradox of the modern world. We built systems of breathtaking complexity: global finance, instantaneous communication, trillion-dollar supply chains. But those systems still depend on a few narrow corridors carved into the earth long before humanity existed. And when those corridors become contested, the illusion of control disappears. Because no algorithm, no hedge fund, and no government policy can override the laws of physics or geography. And this collision between financial logic and physical reality doesn't just happen in geopolitics. It happens inside corporations too. If you want to see what happens when a legendary engineering company tries to ignore the laws of physics and build airplanes using financial spreadsheets instead of engineering, watch our breakdown of how accountants destroyed Boeing. Because sometimes the most dangerous illusions aren't on the battlefield, they're in the boardroom.